Oh, there we're working fine. All right, let's get the meeting called to order here. We still have some workshop items that we didn't finish, so we're going to start right in with those. Before we do that, I want to welcome everybody here and take a brief moment to introduce the commissioners and staff.
Randy Dahl, Leon.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Bolton from Garden City.
Tom Dill, Salina.
Gerald Lauber from Topeka.
Frank Meyer from Harrington.
Don Budd, Kansas City.
Robert Wilson, Pittsburgh.
Sheila Camus, Commission Secretary.
Todd Workman, Topeka.
T. Sexton Pratt.
Chris Thomason, Legal Counsel.
This is the time for general public comment on non-agenda items. Does anybody have any comments tonight? Yes, sir. Please come up and state your name.
In Kansas, regards the new bait law that you passed, wanting to get some clarification here. How much is the fine going to be? Is it per perch or just one fine? How are they going to determine this?
Well, I'll defer this to our general counsel.
Sure, I'm not the county prosecutor, but essentially, I think if you're talking about a fine, it's a Class C misdemeanor to violate the law as it's written, which is a $500 fine or up to 30 days in jail, I think. I don't think that that's ever been imposed recently that I would know of. But it's by an incident. I don't know that it's by bait fish, not by per fish.
Now, is this going to be county judge to judge, or is this going to be a standard deal statewide?
That is what a Class C misdemeanor is. It's statewide penalty. So
the fine would be the same statewide.
It's imposed by the judge. So whatever the judge imposes, that is the maximum.
The law is on the books. The local county attorney will make a decision as to how he enforces and prosecutes the law. The game warden writes a ticket, and then the county attorney will decide what he wants to do with it. And so it could potentially vary in enforcement from county to county, but the state law is uniform in all 105 counties. It is my surmise that they will probably not impose a fine based on the number of fish that would be there.
It would just be that you illegal transported them.
Yeah.
Now, if you went fishing at Marion in the morning and bought some minnows at the bait station, but you decide to go to Alvarado, now can you take them minnows to Alvarado? Or do you have to dump them and buy more at Alvarado?
I think, is Marion in A&S water? I'm not 100% sure on the list. So you would not be able to take them off the water there.
So you'd have to dump them and buy new minnows at Alvarado.
I think you're not allowed to take bait fish off the water,
No.
or fish off the water. Is that correct?
Now you bought them legally at the bait store, but that don't matter.
Once you take them onto the water, you can't take them off the water if it's an A&S water. You can't transport fish off of that body of water.
So you've made it pretty hard to fish 2 lakes in one day.
If that's what your opinion is, yes.
Well, is that your opinion? You're telling me I can't do it. Now, would that be something you'd say or not?
I would say you wouldn't be able to do it.
Do it. Oh, okay, then. Thank you.
there was a discussion on some of these items, and we're going to readdress some things too. We had that in the earlier afternoon, but that's okay. I understand what you're saying. All right. Any more public comment? All right, let's talk about prairie chickens. Tell us something we want to hear.
All right, I'll do my best.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, members of the public. We are talking about prairie chickens. Just give you a little bit of a brief overview here again before we get into a recommendation. We do have two species in the state, the greater prairie chicken and the lesser prairie chicken. The greater occupies pretty much the eastern half of the state out into northwestern Kansas. Lesser chicken occupies south central Kansas and the sand sage habitats in southwest Kansas and shortgrass CRP habitats in the west central part of the state. You can see the range on Figure 1 in the briefing book materials. The density of birds across the state is quite variable, which you can see depicted in Figure 2. We now have the highest densities in the state in north central and west central Kansas, probably due most likely to CRP that's went into that area over the last 15 years. And in fact, our range of both species has greatly expanded, and numbers have increased over the last 15 years in that part of the state to the point now where the most robust chicken populations in Kansas occur in that area. The one thing I also wanted to mention is the lesser prairie chicken, which occurs again in the southwestern part of the state, is a federal candidate species for T&E listing. And however, we have good information from a couple different research projects that have occurred in Kansas to indicate that harvest is not a significant factor pertaining to changes in population growth. The service indicates that themselves in their notice of review. Currently, our harvest of chickens occurs in those three management units that are depicted on Figure 2. Our most liberal regulations are now in the eastern part of the state. Our most conservative regulations are in the west, and that doesn't match up with our chicken populations because we have those higher densities in the western part of the state. I also wanted to mention that we currently monitor harvest of these two species through a postseason mail survey to our small game license holders. And for prairie chickens, that doesn't work particularly well in terms of estimating accurate and precise estimates because only 3% and 1% of those small game license holders pursue greater and lesser chickens respectively. That leads to few completed questionnaires from people who hunted prairie chickens, which leads to inaccurate and imprecise estimates, which makes it difficult to manage the species. So with all that in mind, we are making a recommendation that will increase hunting opportunity in the western part of the state. And there is a change to what we're recommending from what you see in the briefing book. If you look at Figure 2, which shows our current unit boundaries, which was our original proposal, we are recommending that the southern boundary of that northwestern unit go a little bit farther south. It's currently I-70. And we're recommending that move down to Highway 96, which again isn't shown on that map, but it goes generally from Great Bend westward through Scott City on out west to the Colorado-Kansas state line. And by dipping that line south, we encompass a lot of that region where we have those high densities of prairie chickens. And we have the science to support increased harvest in that area as well. So that's our recommendation for unit boundaries. In that new unit boundary, the northwestern part of the state, we're proposing to add an early season, which would run from September 15 to October 15, and with the two-bird bag all the way through, and including the late season, which runs from the third Saturday in November through the end of January. So it would be quite a change for that area north of Highway 96. But again, we've got the science to support the increased harvest, and we should provide that opportunity to our constituents is our recommendation. The other thing we are recommending is a mandatory permit for our prairie chicken hunters, and that would be issued through our Kohl's system, and that permit would be sold at a fee of $250, which is the minimum amount we can charge. That's the processing fee, and we're recommending that permit be issued so that we can get better estimates of harvest and harvest distribution for both species across the state, and that's going to become increasingly more important as the Fish and Wildlife Service considers a listing of the species. If we want to continue hunting lessers, we're going to have much better information to justify it. So that's one reason, but it also helps us better delineate distribution of the two species and target our conservation programs. So those are our two recommendations, and with that, I'd stand for questions.
Anybody have any questions for Jim?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. So on the $2.50 fee, that's just a cost that we have to pass along to the vendor, is my understanding. That's correct?
That's my understanding, too.
Okay. That's what we talked about last time, our last meeting. And then the purpose of the survey, now what kind of information are you going to gather? And
Well, initially, we'll be able to get better harvest estimates because we'll be able to target that group of people that are potentially hunting chickens rather than all of our small game license holders.
okay.
So we'll have a smaller group of folks to survey. So we'll get better harvest estimates, more precise harvest estimates, which allows us to develop better distribution maps for the species. And then in subsequent years, we'll have a list of all those people that responded to the survey, so we'll have a better idea of who's actually hunting chickens in the state. And with that list, we'll be able to do things like wing collections, feather collections, to help us better delineate species, which that'll be particularly important in the western part of the state where our graders and lessers overlap. So those are some of the things we're trying to get out of this permit.
So the survey then, it's more designed for the lessers primarily than the graders?
That's the big push for why we're doing this, but we also need it for graders too. They're imperiled in our state more so than lessers, and the same thing that is happening to lessers could happen to graders in the future, and we'll be better prepared if that happens.
I guess where I'm driving with all this is, as we discussed at our last meeting, I used to have the wonderful opportunity to hunt this species, and I don't really anymore in the traditional areas that I used to in the 80s. And I think we know that it's burning. It's intensive cattle grazing and rate of gain, and with no concern for nesting populations. I mean, isn't that really the issue, is burning?
That's the big issue in the Flint Hills, burning or lack thereof, inadequate fire frequencies, how I like to say it. In the core of the Flint Hills, it is the annual burning intensive double stocking. There's
Right.
very little, if any, residual nesting cover left. And then you get outside of the Flint Hills and you've got people that don't burn at all, and you've got woody encroachment.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of that happy medium.
Well, couldn't we, I mean, I'm so pleased to see that big green area up at the top of the state. I really, and that makes my heart feel better, but my heart sinks a little bit to look at our Flint Hills area. Wouldn't it be incumbent upon us to provide some type of educational, or do we do that already? I mean, working with the ranchers.
You know, we spend a lot of time working with ranchers, and we have some conservation programs ourselves designed to target the Flint Hills specifically. We are also in the process right now of conducting research in that area. We're comparing prairie chicken performance in areas that are patch burn grazed
Right.
versus those that are annual burned and double stocked. And we've got the conservation agencies, the USDA conservation agencies, particularly NRCS, tied into that research project. And
So
the hope is
you got to partner with that.
the hope is when we're done, we're going to develop an extension style publication and help direct their programs better to benefit chickens in the hills. So
Have
we're
you had
very
any
concerned.
relationship with KLA on this particular issue in the Flint Hills? Southern Flint?
You know, they certainly know our concerns,
Yeah.
and I've talked to those folks with KLA. I wouldn't say they're a partner on this research project, but
I-
I keep them up to date on what we're doing.
Okay, because I think that would be a group you'd want to get pointing in your direction. I don't know, it's very likely that would ever happen because they have their constituency and they have goals and objectives that run counter to what you and I are thinking about right here
Right.
on this
Right.
species. So
I should mention one other thing too. There's a couple different livestock performance studies going on in the Flint Hills too, looking at some of these practices that we think are more beneficial to chickens. So we'll not only have some data to show them the benefits to wildlife, but we should have some information to show them how it affects livestock performance as well. And that should help us better implement and educate those folks about conservation.
I think I think to have a big impact on that, you're going to have to provide, the department, whatever, some type of financial, I mean, rate of gain is what these ranchers are wanting, and I can't blame them. This is the best grass on earth, so they put their cattle on it and they try to maximize that. But there just has to be something done for the Flint Hills greater prairie chicken population, and it's been decimated for the past 30 years. I'm glad we're doing the study. I'm in agreement with both of your recommendations here, but I don't know, it just seems as maybe you're doing a lot more than what I'm aware of. I mean, it just seems like we should be more aggressive in our approach to that.
We're partnering, hand in hand with those conservation agencies and extension to deliver those programs and education. And the missing link really is that data. We're all for providing extra incentives to get those folks into conservation programs, but without that data, we really don't have a good idea what sort of incentive to provide. Yeah. And that's one of the main basis for doing those studies. And hopefully we'll be there in 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Last question. Last time, our last meeting, wasn't it about $20,000 that we were going to raise through this fee, this prairie chicken, based on the 250 times?
Yeah, close. We've got roughly 10,000 chicken hunters across the state. So, of course, none of that money comes back to us. It's a processing fee. Right.
And we were thinking about, maybe I was the only person in the room thinking that, and I think you added, I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but another license fee, another little $2.50 fee. If there would be some way this agency could fund, I mean, this money doesn't go to us, it goes to the vendor.
Right.
But it's another irritation for our sportsman and our hunter. And I promise you, this won't, the extra $2.50, not anybody is going to say, well, that's a good thing. Not very many people would say that. They're going to go, okay, another fee. Right. And it's such a small amount. Couldn't we be creative and come up with another way of paying for that?
I thought about your comments the last time quite a bit, and our intent was never to charge people to do this. We were forced that way.
Sure.
But if we offer it to them free, I mean, if we pick up that fee as a department, we end up back in the same situation we are right now, and that we'll have people probably getting the permit that have no intention to hunt chickens, and then it's going to make it more difficult for us to survey and develop harvest estimates, which is the whole point of the permit. So
I think you'll get more compliance if somebody spent money for the fee and they view themselves as having a responsibility for having that fee. I agree with Randy, and plus I think he's right on the reason the prairie chickens are losing numbers is because of the habitat and whatnot. But we need to have as much statistical firepower as we can, or we're going to have the lesser prairie chickens listed, and then we're going to have groups that we are familiar with saying we should not hunt greater prairie chickens because we'll have misidentification and we'll shoot lessers and we'll lose all of our prairie chicken hunting.
You're on the right track. This is our best shot to keep hunting.
That's all I had. Thank you.
There was very little burning in the Flint Hills this year during the early growth of the grass.
You're right.
You just didn't see any. No.
Well, I mean, the effects of the lack of burning or lesser burning won't be seen probably until next spring because that'll lead to better nesting conditions this summer. But they still won't be great because they didn't burn because they didn't have much cover to burn. So
grass is growing like the dickens.
It is.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for Jim?
I have a couple, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Jim, when do they receive this survey? After the season or?
Well, it'll go out. This will be the first year, of course, if this gets passed. It'll go out right after the season, so it'll be in February.
And what makes that mandatory that they report? Is there anything in there to make them report that's mandatory?
As far as I'm concerned, it's voluntary, but it's solely voluntary.
So we're going to have the shabby numbers that we always have on all of these surveys?
Well, and I hope not. I think we've got good numbers on our turkey survey, which I also conduct. And as part of that survey, I offer an incentive to folks who respond. I give away a turkey print every year. So by doing that, it helps increase my response rate. And I get up in that 60% ballpark or 65% ballpark.
That's enough to make a decision on management?
Yes.
It's 60%?
Yes. If you do multiple surveys and try to reduce the bias as much as possible, then yes, you can extrapolate out to all the permit holders.
Maybe we ought to do something like that on deer surveys.
It's a pretty similar process to what Lloyd's is doing already.
Is it?
I think, yeah.
I mean, as far as compliance, do we do anything? Well, I'll ask
Well,
Lloyd.
go ahead. Yeah.
Are you getting 62% on deer? Okay, all right. Is there any plans to do something else to make this mandatory if those numbers don't come in?
I hope we don't get to that point, but if we don't get the data we need, then that's something we'll certainly discuss.
Okay.
So,
All right.
I mean,
Thank
we
you.
got to have the numbers.
Right.
Any other questions from the commission? Questions from the public? Mike?
Yeah, Jim. Will this be voted on at the next meeting, Chris, or what's, okay. And if it's voted on at the next meeting and it passes, when will this go into effect?
Would be in effect for this fall.
So it'll start for the September 15 season. And the permit, does that cover the season, or do they get a new one every year like they do a hunting license?
Good question. We haven't hashed that out yet.
It just came in, so I'm not. It's just-
Well, good question.
Okay.
So we'll have to discuss that.
Okay.
Any more questions from the public? Any more questions from the commission? Thank you.
Thanks.
Falconry?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Hopefully I'm going to be real quick tonight. I'm not going to go back into any details about falconry. Just an update more than anything. We do have the regulations written up. They've been submitted to the Attorney General's office, and we're looking at probably an August vote. So with that, I'll stand for any questions that anybody has.
How many falconry permits did we offer last year? 79?
74.
74.
74. Any questions from the commission? Any questions from the public? You've done a lot of work for a small constituency.
Yes, I have. And they certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Brad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is the second workshop for a few public lands regulations that we discussed during the general session and the first workshop session. I believe we're on schedule to vote in June on these recommendations. As you are aware, the public lands section manages 335,000 acres of land and water, primarily for public use, and this public use must be controlled in a way that provides fairness and opportunity for all. Therefore, we're bringing forward some recommendations where some of the fairness and opportunity issues have been in jeopardy or questioned. And these are the same recommendations that we discussed last time. I'll briefly go over those. They include tree stands, where we're recommending we limit 2 per person on all department managed lands, and these tree stands must be marked with the user's name and address or KDWP number. Portable ground blinds, we're recommending that they are removed at the end of each day and are also marked with the owner's names and name and address or KDWP number. Waterfowl decoys, we are recommending they shall be removed at the end of each day. On baiting, we are recommending that no person shall be able to place, deposit, expose, distribute, scatter bait while hunting or preparing to hunt on department lands. And the definition of bait is considered to be grain, fruit, vegetables, nuts, hay, salt, sorghum, feed, or other mineral or food that is capable of attracting wildlife. This does not include liquid scents or sprays. Again, like I mentioned before, we are the only state in the Midwest that allows unrestricted baiting on public lands. We are recommending that we permit guiding outfitters with a free permit, that they will let us know. We'll have a short application, and at the end of each hunting season, we'll ask them to provide an annual report. I need to mention again, like I have before, is that beginning in September of 2013, we are probably going to bring forth, probably next January when we do our next reference document on public lands, non-toxic shot for doves on our managed dove fields on public lands. And probably one that's we're going to probably discuss a little bit more is we were asked to look at recommending a 200-yard minimum distance requirement for waterfowl hunting. Commissioner Budd asked us to consider safety. Consider this for safety purposes. And just a quick note that over the last 25 years, we've had a correction in the briefing book item where it says 2. There actually have been 3 incidences where parties close to each other where a hunting accident was reported. And that not all the other accidents in the briefing book, as it's indicated in the briefing book, were self-inflicted. That should have been a majority of all the other 18 accidents, hunting accidents while waterfowl hunting. The majority of those were self-inflicted, but there's been a variety of different types of hunting accidents while waterfowl hunting. And the reason we don't bring any recommendations is it's we've considering this, it's really going to be difficult to enforce. It's going to be difficult to determine who was there first. It's going to be difficult to determine distance when hunters are going in early in the morning when it's dark to determine exact distance of 200 yards or more. It does limit some hunting opportunities if you draw a radius around a point, 200-yard radius around a hunter. That's essentially 26 acres. So we'll have some impact on hunting opportunity. There are, like I said before, there are some areas where hunters are able to hunt within 200 yards of each other. If you ever hunted teal at Cheyenne Bottoms, it's pretty easy, especially the way teal fly and hunters are set up. It's difficult to determine. Some people hunt in groups, but then they split off to determine if they were part of that group or whether they were a separate group. So there's just the enforceability of that is going to be extremely difficult. Limiting hunting opportunity is our other concern. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question. On the waterfowl decoy and removing the decoys at the end of the day without trying to go into the area of the observed, but when does a day end? Does it sundown or midnight, or how do you define that?
I don't remember.
They'd have to remove them. Oh, they can't be left overnight is how the regulation is drafted. So
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
At midnight.
At midnight, okay.
Yeah, the way the draft regulation.
So theoretically, a guy could go out at 12:05 a.m. and put out some.
If they're attended, the regulation is drafted so it says they can't be left unattended overnight. So somebody could stay out there overnight all they wanted with the decoys.
Okay, so it says unattended.
Unattended.
It didn't on
It's
this
the
recommendation.
attendance
So
issue.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And then on the guiding outfitting, Chris, we don't have to revisit this very much in detail. We can't charge a fee for guiding?
Not currently, unless we get a statutory change.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions for Brad from the commission?
Brad, the first one's portable ground blinds. is there any possible way, because I know a lot of handicapped people are going to hunt out of these ground blinds, is there any way we can make an exception if they're disabled?
We do, most of our areas allow handicap access permits. Mm-hmm. And in that permit, we can designate some restrictions on what they can and can't do. So that's the way we've been dealing with handicap access.
I think that'd be. I had a couple calls specific to that, and it I guess I never thought about it, but it makes sense. And their argument was, well, I've got to get somebody to go out and put it out for me, and then I've got to get help out there, and it seems like a burden to take it down in a period of time. So if that's something that's easily done through an administrative process, that's great. The outfitting part of it, we understand the fees. I don't like it, but it doesn't matter what I like. Let's say that an outfitter fails to provide us his annual report. Who's the outfitter police? And what are the consequences?
Again, the consequences, it's a Class C misdemeanor to violate the regulations, so it's a $500 fine up to, and whatever the judge would impose, obviously, within that cap.
And last but not least, of course, Brad, you thought you were going to skate, didn't you?
No.
The 200-yard distance, the reason I'm asking that, and the NRA regulations, every gun club regulation in America, based on a target shotgun shell load, 3 dram ounce and a 7.5, is 900 feet. That is their safety zone. That is their recommendation nationally, not in Kansas. That's a national recommendation. We're not talking about Magnum waterfowl loads. We're not talking about anything like that. I know it's a burden on the department, and I know it's difficult to enforce. And I hate to say it this way, but I just don't care about that. What I care about is the 3%. I bet if we were to bring the 3% in that got hurt, they'd care. And if we can avoid something like that, and you've got a better idea, and you want it to be something else, that's okay. But I think there needs to be something, because what you're seeing now on this public ground with this waterfowl hunting is this guy sitting here and the other guy sitting up right next to him. And does it have to be a distance between decoys, between hunters, between boats? I mean, me and Michael had this conversation at the last meeting. I don't know the answer. I truly don't. What I do know is the facts. And if at a shooting range based on a target load, the distance is 900 feet, why would we put hunters at 10 yards, which is what we've got today? There's no regulation. There needs to be something. And it will be very difficult for me to vote for approval of this unless we have something in that. And if you've got a better answer, before the meeting, anytime, you feel free to call me. I'll listen to anything, and I'll try to work it out with you. But I think there needs to be some sort of guideline for the safety of the hunter.
Is there any other states that have any type of guidelines like that we're aware of?
A distance between waterfowl,
yeah,
hunting parties. I looked, and I don't recall finding any. There's nothing that I just don't recall finding a state that restricted the minimum distance or had a minimum distance requirement.
Well, I think most shooting of waterfowl is over water, aimed up into the air. And once those spent pellets are falling down, they're not that deadly. But seldom do I swing around and shoot over land at waterfowl.
And I guess I should clarify, the 3% is all waterfowl hunting accidents that were reported during that 25-year period. And of the 21, three of those were where it was close proximity to hunters were hit with pellets.
But I'll go back to my original comment. If we are changing policy, public land policy, and we're going to disregard the public safety of the end user, I don't think that's very prudent.
when do we vote on this? In June?
In June, and the regulations have already been published for public comment and drafted. I think it's very difficult to write a regulation that is encompassing enough for a safe opportunity or distance for the conditions. So ultimately what you're proposing is an arbitrary distance limitation. And you yourself said you don't know. I don't know what that is, but that doesn't necessarily lend itself to a situation where you could have hunters with a berm between them and they're on opposite sides of the berm where there's no way that one individual could shoot another individual. I guess my suggestion, primarily because the department didn't recommend that, is that if it's something that you're passionate about pursuing, we take the regulation's already been published for vote without it in there. So we take and look at surrounding states or other states, or give us some time to think about it, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily that we move forward on it in this regulatory cycle. Maybe we wait until next year where we've got something that's better than just 200 yards.
But Chris, this goes to my comment earlier. This isn't the first time I brought it up. I brought it up at 2 previous meetings 5 months ago, total. So I'd like to agree with you, but I can't. I'm sorry.
I think that, while I understand where you're coming from, Don, I guess it's a risk that I'm willing to undertake, because when you're dealing with firearms, there's just no end to situations that are problematic. And I think the net result would be 2 groups of agitated hunters and a game warden running around with a tape measure. And I said earlier, you can't regulate bad judgment. I understand where you're coming from, but I can see a lot of situations to where that would be unduly burdensome, and I just don't know what else to do. I'd like to see these things. I'd like to see, and I think most everything in this public lands proposal is going to be, our constituents are going to agree with it, other than a few hunters who'd like to put up a couple dozen deer stands and sort of informally mark their territory, which is what they do. I guess I'm willing to accept the risk, and I hope you don't say I told you so if something happens here down the road. I just don't know what else to do. I think that would be a real, what did we say, that's 26 acres of public land per person?
Per group.
Per group.
If you're talking, and I've heard this berm argument before, if we have we have public lands. Our public lands are in place today. If we have public lands that 200 yards doesn't work, exclude them. Make them different. It's real simple. If that's the singular issue. If the other issue is running around with a tape measure, is it difficult? Yeah. Am I willing to take the chance? No.
Mr. Chairman, the discussion we had earlier about the doves and everybody just kind of assuming you don't shoot them still, sitting in a tree or sitting on an electric line, we just kind of assume that. I mean, is there any literature or information out in the public that says maintain certain distances? I'm thinking specifically like Cheyenne Bottoms, where we have a lot of out-of-state hunters come in there. I mean, do we have literature and information that suggests safe distances or?
Well, I'm guessing, and in hunter safety and whatnot, I'm guessing that's exactly what it says, maintain a safe distance.
Yeah.
But I don't think it defines safe in any unit of measure, like so many yards or so many feet or something like this. I think maintain a safe distance. Don's point is a safe distance should be where some high velocity shot won't hit somebody else.
Well, if you have the national standard, which we do, which is 900 feet for a standard target load, they didn't just dream this up. They didn't just pick that number arbitrarily. That's a safe distance in their mind. So if we have a national standard, if we've got the speed limit in the state of Kansas that says 75, and well, we don't really want to enforce it that way, go ahead and do 85. Is that okay? Because you're only going to hurt 3% of the people.
Well, but what about, well, we're trying to undertake this burden of safety. I remember hunting quail with a group, and everybody starts getting up real close to the dog. At what point do we start placing a distance and a mandate to people that say, you know, quail hunters shall not, you know, will only get so close to one another? You know, I think we're just, I see your argument. I guess I'm willing to go ahead and let the vote come, and if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. And I don't mean to be dismissive of your position. I just don't know how else we can do it. And I'm not sure I really want to set a so many yard limit, because that may ration some resource and may ration some very limited land that may not be necessary.
Well, and I certainly don't want to do that, but what I do want to do, just like we talked earlier about other regulations or potential changes in regulations, I want to give the waterfowl hunters in the state of Kansas, the non-residents and the residents, the same consideration that we're giving the whooping crane.
Yeah, whooping crane protectors care less about us than they did cranes.
And that's why,
by the way,
you made my point, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I don't know what to do. First of all, is there any other comments from other commissioners?
Well, if you don't mind, sitting here listening to this, I mean, I agree with Don's, and I understand both sides of the issues, but I'm wondering, you know, what we have in regulation, it still wouldn't preclude us, if we continue to look at it the next year, but even preclude us from actually posting signage for recommendation around our public areas, saying it is recommended that minimum distance be kept between 200 to 300 yards, or whichever we decide on. When you could have a posting as such for information purposes coming in, even if it's not in regulation, and then continue to explore whether you wanted to regulate it. I mean, that would be my thought.
You know, in the sake of compromise here, if we could, we're only talking about waterfowl areas. We're not talking about all public lands. We're talking about waterfowl areas specifically. If we could live with what Commissioner Dill suggested until next year, my fight's not going to change. My opinion's not going to change. I'm hoping I can change some of my other fellow commissioners' opinion. Probably not Frank's. He's old and set in his ways, but if
I've heard both sides of the argument.
Right, but if we can do something like that with some signage on just the waterfowl area specific, with just a suggestatory sign, and we can maybe get a little more information by the time it comes. I just don't want to get to this point in every one of these issues that we talk about this, we don't really address it, and then all of a sudden we get to where, well, we've got to vote next month and the ordinance has been published. Just my statement from earlier today is going to be a fact, guys, and everybody's going to be up in arms. But if I don't like a recommendation, my motion is going to be something else. That's what it's going to be. The commission doesn't have to approve it, but that's what it's going to be.
You can always move an amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Yep.
Not a problem. Yep.
Well, I thought we already had some, did I misunderstand? My question was, do we have some written guidelines or information or documentation already out there suggesting a safe distance? I thought I heard yes. Did I?
I think it says a safe distance. I don't think we have any recommendations that list.
And most of our hunter education literature, you know, promotes sportsmanship ethics and things like that. So that would have been be included in there. Is recognize the other public lands users and hunters that be ethical and be responsible and take appropriate action. Obviously there's some people that have a difficult time with that. So
I just think for the sake of moving forward with it and the fact that we could actually spend a little bit of money on signage, orange, that's posted around the waterfowl areas that says minimum recommended distance be X, even though it's not a regulation, and see if it's revisited next year.
Now, why couldn't we, why just waterfowl? Why not pheasant hunting?
This will never end.
Well, it's a rhetorical question. That's the reason.
That's sort of my point. Is why don't we, not let the camel's head get under the tent? Because then what are you going to do? What is the recommended distance for pheasants? What is the recommended distance for quail hunting? How far away should we be for hunting turtle doves? I think there's just kind of no end to it.
Yeah.
I prefer relying on education and saying maintain a safe distance, exercise ethics, share the resource with others, important safety. I don't know. I kind of hate to start having linear mandates.
I think we go by when I'm swinging around on a pheasant and say, gee, that pheasant looks just like Jim. I don't squeeze the trigger.
Why don't we, at this point in time, as chairman, I'm going to suggest that we move on and leave this as it is. I'm going to encourage public lands to consider coming up with a little more warning and best practice signage to try to move towards Don's concerns, to try to eliminate some concerns. And I'd like for you guys to think it over and see whether you think it's good to just have safe distance underlined in bold letters, whether you say we prefer 200 yards. I just don't know whether 200 yards is the magic number anyway. I can understand where he's coming from. I don't participate in enough activity on some of these public lands to know how restrictive that can become. So that's what I think the consensus of the commission wants. And I'm going to suggest we go ahead and run this proposed reg as presented, as it's set up. And hopefully we'll get it passed, because the bulk of what's in there is very important. And I think we're already creating restrictions on the waterfowl usage, trying to be more fair. And the only thing that I think is a bone of contention is this set limit. And we might see what other states do, and I would propose that we have somebody kind of study it a little bit, and I'm sure it'll pop up intermittently throughout this next year, and we can always add it later if we find that we're in a minority.
Sounds good.
I just one last comment. I don't want anybody to think that we don't care about safety on public lands, because we do. But it's whether it's waterfowl hunting or as Commissioner Dole brought up, where does it stop? We have several hundred people on opening day of dove season around a 10-acre dove field. We have a number of firearms deer hunters out there that are all carrying high-powered fire weapons that can travel large distances. It just that is a concern, and my concern is if we start putting limits on these or minimum distance requirements, we're going to make people unknowingly violate a regulation, because they're not going to know. In some cases, they're within 200 yards. It's just going to be extremely difficult, and I do understand Commissioner Budd's recommendation, and we'll try to come up with a solution, and whatever that is, we will do some exploring and try to come back with something that that hopefully somebody will be satisfied with.
Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm looking for. As right now, somebody can go in and set up right next to the other guy, and these guys that are out here enforcing it they can go out and say, okay, best safe practice, whatever argument they wanted to use, and the guys can kind of dismiss them. If you've got at least a sign, the guy can say, hey guys, did you see the sign? It's 200 yards. You know, let's have some common courtesy. There's a little bit of teeth to that, possibly. No citation involved, like you say. You know, you're not standing on the guy's throat, but at least they have some sort of leverage to where they can at least go and educate them. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to set up within 10 yards and be like, hey, I'm here, don't shoot this way. You say, okay, I won't, and let's take care of it, you know.
You need to come to Duck Swamp with me more.
Any other questions from anybody? Mike?
Yeah, questions for the commissioner. You said just waterfowl areas. What are you talking about? What areas for that? In your perfect, I mean, with what you've been thinking a lot about this, obviously. So what you're seeing?
What would your assumption be of waterfowl areas?
I'm asking you the question.
Well, I understand, but now I've asked you one, and I'll answer yours first. Any areas that are designated as waterfowl areas by the department, what would your answer be?
I don't know if we have ones that we specifically do that or not. I mean, we've got Cheyenne Bottoms Wildlife Area, and we've got Neosho Wildlife Area, Maridazine, but we also have some federal stuff too.
Yeah, but I don't think that's under our control, is it?
Well, we control manage the hunting on the property. We do allow waterfowl hunting. We manage, you know.
But it would be any, like the upper end of some of the reservoirs where we have waterfowl habitat.
Like Perry's got their own swamps.
And Tuttle Creek does too.
Yeah.
So anything that's managed for waterfowl.
Correct.
Okay. And you said the national standard is for light target loads is how far?
900 feet.
Okay, and you're proposing 600 feet.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You may go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry to make you wait. All right. Lloyd, you're back. You're not going to want to open a deer season early, are you?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
This is KAR 115.25.9A. It's deer seasons basically for the Fort Riley subunit. We've discussed this. We've worked with the people at Fort Riley, and we have a document, a draft of the regulation has already been prepared. We're ready to bring this forward in June for a public hearing with all of the items that the personnel at Fort Riley have recommended, each one of them. Do you want me to go through each?
No.
Okay. This is everything that we talked about at our March meeting. We've included in the document. Are there any questions or comments?
Nothing that they recommended met with disdain from you or your group?
No, we've included everything that they recommended. There's really very little difference in this year's season's structure for Fort Riley and what they had last year.
Looks good to me. They've got special needs there.
Any comments from the public? Any more comments from the commissioners? You can go.
Thank you.
All right, public hearing time. Mr. Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, members of the public. This is KAR 11525-5, which is fall turkey seasons, bag limits, and permits. And I'll jump right to the recommendation on this one. We're recommending a change of the fall unit boundaries to go from the current 4, which you can see on Figure 1 in your briefing book materials. The proposal is for the unit boundaries depicted on Figure 3, which would move us towards 6 units. By doing that, it will allow us to match up our hunt units with our management units, which will make it easier for us to use our data to make recommendations on bag limits changes for fall and spring. And that will allow us to adopt an adaptive harvest strategy, which I've talked to you about before. You can see how that's laid out in Appendix 1, as well as some of the data for each of these new regions we're proposing, so you can see how it would work. And basically how it works is there's a hierarchy of regulation packages for both spring and fall, and our resident spring hunt success will be used as a trigger to determine when we move up and down that hierarchy of regulation package, coupled with the percentage of jakes in the harvest to make sure that folks are still harvesting adult birds primarily. So those would be the 2 triggers, and there'd be a hierarchy of regulation packages associated with it. Tonight you're voting on the fall units, and by making those changes to the unit boundaries, it also changes some of the bag limits, and basically the big change is it would go from 1 bird in the fall in a lot of central Kansas to 4 birds in the fall for all 4 of those easternmost units that are depicted on Figure 3. And with one other thing, if you guys pass this recommendation tonight, we'll also be coming back to you for changes to the spring unit boundaries as well, so they'll coincide. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Pittman? Any questions or comments from the public? I'd like a motion we approve this.
So move.
Second it.
Any more discussion? Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Passed 7-0.
Thank you.
Jim. And an evening would not be complete without Mr. Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. So I've presented the antelope regulation a couple times here, so I will be brief. The season structure and dates are the same as they have been in recent seasons. Our permit recommendations for units 2 and 17 are the same as they were last year. Our permit recommendations have declined slightly in unit 18, and we weren't issuing that many permits to begin with due to drought down in that area. Archery permits are unlimited and available to both residents and non-residents, and these limited draw permits are restricted to residents only. So that's kind of the highlights of the pronghorn regulation.
Are there any questions for Matt? Any questions from the public? I'd like a motion that we approve these recommendations, or approve KAR 115-27-7.
So move.
Second. Is there any additional discussion?
That was 25-7, correct?
Yeah, 25.
Yes. Did I say it wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Passed 7-0.
Elk?
Okay, we're recommending that 15 antlerless elk permits and 10 any elk permits be allocated for Unit 2, which includes Fort Riley. An unlimited number of hunt-owned land permits are allocated for that unit as well. Unit 3 is over-the-counter for general residents and landowners, and elk permits are restricted to residents with the exception of the one commissioner's permit that is made available each year. And
I should have added those permit allocations for Unit 2 are the same as what they were last year.
Do you sell any hunt your own land or any of the over-the-counter Atlas only in Unit 3?
Yeah, I don't. We sold 39 landowner or general resident permits total last year. I don't have the breakdown in front of me as for how many were over there. I would guess probably.
Did we have any harvest?
There were a couple of animals harvested, I believe, in Logan County, and I think there was one in Ford County, perhaps this year. Most years we have one or two harvested in Hamilton County and at least one or two in Ford County. So we had.
Are those our elk or are those Colorado's elk got lost?
Well, they're residents now. They're Kansas residents. There are reproducing herds out there in those areas.
Okay.
You got to show your driver's license before you
Yeah.
can get shot, see, so we know whether they're residents or not.
That's important.
Yes.
But they do, I mean, they're certainly capable of moving great distances out there.
Okay. Any other comments for Matt from either the commission or the public?
Yeah, it's done in here.
Can I have a motion that we approve 25-8?
I move to adopt.
A second, Mr. Chairman.
Sheila?
Commissioner Bolton?
Yes.
Commissioner Budd?
Yes.
Commissioner Dill?
Yes.
Commissioner Dahl?
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauber?
Yes.
Pass 7-0.
Well, that concludes the public hearing. Thank you, Matt. That concludes the public hearing this evening. Are we set okay as far as future meeting locations and dates?
Yes, they're set through this year, but.
We could go ahead and do January.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I had an opportunity to speak with the president of Butler Community College yesterday, and they would be most happy to host us at their new facility there in Butler County at the college.
That's a nice facility.
Yeah,
That
it
would
is.
be, I think that would be fine.
Yeah.
That's in El Dorado.
Mhm.
They have two meeting rooms. They have one that will hold about 25 or 30, and then they have another room. I don't know if you've been there.
We were in
The big
room.
one?
Yeah.
The big one, so whichever we think will fit, so. What day would that be?
Suggest the 10th.
January 10th? Okay.
Anybody have an objection with that? All right.
We also have an invitation to go to Manhattan. So for future, sometime in next year, we have an offer or a suggestion for Manhattan.
Where'd they want to do it in Manhattan?
They didn't pick the place, they just would like us to come to Manhattan.
That'd be nice.
All right. Is there any other business we have to deal with tonight or that staff recommends that we deal with?
We're all done.
Well, all right. I appreciate the commission.